Hey, everybody. Welcome to the best place to be on a Wednesday. My name is Kat. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus, and I struggle with worry and grief. So today, we are going to continue talking about the power of forgiveness. So just as a recap, we are in step 7. We asked God for the grace to forgive those who've hurt us. And our verse is Philippians 2:13, for God is working in you, giving you the desire and the power to do what pleases him. So we talked a lot about forgiveness this month, right? We've discussed why we should forgive. Pastor Glenn did kind of a two-part series around some of the reasons we struggle to forgive. And what we're going to start talking about today, and we're going to talk about this the next 2 weeks, I think it's just really important that we really grasp is a true understanding of what forgiveness is. And what does it really mean to forgive? And I think that a lot of us have an incorrect understanding of what forgiveness means. And often it's that misunderstanding that's keeping us from the full freedom that we can find in forgiveness. So today we're going to start digging into that. And this is actually going to be 2 parts. So we're going to start it today. Jeremy's going to wrap us up next week. There's a lot to unpack here, so kind of mark your calendars. But we're going to start taking apart some of the misconceptions and the false ideas we have about forgiveness. So when I was thinking about some of the concepts surrounding this, and when I was thinking about this lesson, I started thinking about, I've been on this kick lately. I say lately, it's probably been about a year, where I've decided that I am going to develop a green thumb if it kills me. And I'm going to have like a house full of plants. Y'all know what I'm talking about. You see all this stuff like on Instagram and magazines, and these people that have these gorgeous houses. I'm not there yet. But I'm determined to do this. And I've always loved plants. I've always loved the outdoors. And I've always loved the way a room looks, right, when it's full of plants and greenery. There's just something really soothing. There's something really peaceful about that look, about that feeling, about being surrounded, right, by nature. And I've always loved that. Years ago, admittedly, when my kids were younger and I had quite a bit less time, I tried to create this with artificial plants, and I had a lot. Don't sigh. Don't be looking at anybody either. Look, they're easy, right? You go pick out a few things, you throw them up on a shelf, you leave it alone, there's no work involved, and they look good from a distance. I mean, you don't want to get too close because, then you can tell. They don't actually do anything. You don't get any benefit from them that you get from a real plant. They don't clean the air. They don't grow. They're not going to bloom. It's not like a fruit or a vegetable or herb. You can't eat them. I mean, they quite literally do nothing but sit and collect dust. And so I was determined, I'm going to do this for real. Oh, good Lord, real plants take work. I mean, anybody in here garden, grow things? It is hard. And not just to keep them alive, but to keep them thriving. So water's a problem, right? So apparently you've got to worry about the underwatering and the overwatering. I have learned something about myself. I am a chronic overwaterer. I want my plants to need me. You know what I'm talking about? Like, I want to get up and I want to water my plants in the morning with my coffee, and I want to do the little spritzing with the humidifier. Like, I want to do something with this thing. I have killed so many plants. Y'all, I kill cactus. That's what can't live in my house because you're not supposed to bother it, and I just want it to want me to take care of it. I do great with ferns because you can basically drown those and they're happy. Watering has been an issue. Then you got to worry about the sun, because some need full sun, some need shade, some need bright sun, but they need indirect bright sun. And it can be bright sun if it's by an east-facing window, but not if it's by a west-facing window. And then the leaves are turning yellow, but are they turning yellow because you've overwatered it or because it's getting too much sun? Like, this is a whole thing. It's been a cycle. We're not going to talk about the amount of money that I've spent on different types of soil, because apparently dirt's not dirt. And then you got pest control. And not everything works on everything, because you got your fungus gnats and you got aphids and you got white flies and anyway. I had someone gift me with a plant recently, and God bless her, I'm not sure if we're going to see if it makes it. But I'm telling you, as much work as it's been, I've been tempted a few times to be like, forget it, I'm done with this, throw them out, we'll go up to Michael's, we'll buy some plastic stuff, put it on the shelf, nobody will know. But I've stuck it out. And one of the things that I've realized is if you put in the time, you put in the effort, you take the steps that it takes to grow the real thing, and the benefits are amazing. It has taken over a year, but I'm finally seeing a payoff, right? I finally have that not just the look, but all of the benefits. I have herbs I can cook with. I have a room that I'm telling you, I got 3 dogs, y'all. I know when something doesn't smell fresh. I have got a room that I don't have to spray anything in. It's like being outside. There's something about creating a workspace where this has worked for me. But it has taken so much more work to cultivate the real thing than it would to simply throw up something that's fake. And when I was thinking about this, the same thing is true for forgiveness. This step 7, is a step that so many of us get stuck on. We make it to this point in our recovery and we stop, say, nope, can't do this one. But more often than that, what I hear from people over and over again, and I've been there and I've felt it, is, well, I did it. I forgave. I did step 7. But I still feel stuck. Something doesn't feel right. I forgave them, but I'm still angry. I'm still hurt. I don't have any of this freedom. I don't have any of this peace that everybody keeps talking about. They keep telling me that I'm going to feel so much better when I do this. And I know forgiveness isn't a feeling. It's a choice. But if it's a choice I made, where's all this good stuff that's supposed to come from making this choice? And I think where a lot of us get stuck, and what a lot of this ends up being, is what we've actually experienced is artificial forgiveness. Sometimes you'll read about this, and it's called toxic forgiveness. And it's a bit of an oxymoron, because it's not forgiveness at all. It's something we've convinced ourselves is forgiveness. And just like those artificial plants, it kind of looks good at a glance, but it isn't real. And because it isn't real, we don't find the freedom, we don't find the joy that comes from genuine forgiveness. See, artificial forgiveness is simply where we claim to have forgiven someone. We think we've forgiven. But it isn't because we've healed. It isn't because we mean it. It isn't even because it is a choice we've made. But it's because we've caved to pressure, internal or external, to do what we think is expected of us, to say what we think is expected of us. Artificial forgiveness is really appeasement. It is nothing more than ignoring what happened so other people won't be angry, so other people won't be uncomfortable, or so I don't have to deal with it anymore. And it's really a form of self-betrayal, right? Forcing yourself to ignore what's actually happened. And it seems easier at first, right? Than having to actually process, have to deal. But without that work, without that investment, you don't have anything real on the other side of it, and you don't have all the things that are produced by something that's real. And there's a couple of things that you can kind of look at when you think, well, is this where I'm at? Is this what I'm experiencing? Am I experiencing this artificial version of forgiveness? Have I settled for a fake version of what I was promised? There's a couple things you can kind of look out for that are clues that this might be something that's causing you to stay stuck. One of them is if you feel that you forgave because you had to. You didn't make a choice. You didn't feel you had a choice. Maybe it was external pressure from others, constantly hearing, you need to be the bigger person. Or make sure you keep the peace. Don't rock the boat. Maybe you claim to forgive simply to appease them, to stop the fighting, to stop any more conflict. Sometimes that pressure doesn't come from other people. It comes from here. Sometimes that's pressure that we put on ourselves. Sometimes we're feeling so much shame or guilt or embarrassment that someone could hurt us in the first place, that we pretend. We mask it. I'm over it. Doesn't matter to me. I don't care. Another sign that maybe you've settled for an artificial version of what God has for you is a lot of negative self-talk. And I'm talking about self-talk that tries to deny how you actually feel, right? So if you catch yourself saying things like, I shouldn't be this mad. I shouldn't be hurt by this. Or there's something wrong with me. This is stupid. I shouldn't be letting this impact my relationship. If you find that you're dismissing how you really feel, you're dismissing where you really are, you're essentially trying to talk yourself out of what you feel. You may be embracing artificial forgiveness. This is also where we tend to try our unhealthy coping mechanisms to deny some of those feelings, right? If you're trying to drink enough, if you're trying to use enough, if you're trying to work enough, if you're trying to isolate enough that I don't feel this way, this is where we get into trouble. Now, we don't allow ourselves to be led by our feelings. But we absolutely have to pay attention to those feelings, because what those feelings are signals. And they're trying to tell you something. And in this case, they're trying to tell you that you haven't healed and that there's still work to be done. Another way that this can show up in your life, and this is a big one, I think, that hits a lot of us, is passive-aggressive behavior. Like, I've forgiven you. I'm good. But I didn't deal with the hurt. I just kind of crammed it in the back of our mind, and it's going to come back later, and it's going to come back in ways we often don't expect. All of that anger, all of that resentment will impact how we communicate and relate with others. You know, you find yourself with this wonderful person that you've forgiven, making sarcastic comments, constantly getting your little digs in every time you interact with them. Everything they do irritates you, even when it doesn't make any sense and shouldn't irritate you, right? You're constantly bringing up any and every failure you can find in them. You don't address it directly, but you're constantly finding fault, constantly irritated. This may be time to really evaluate, is what I offered real forgiveness? And see, these are all signs of artificial forgiveness. And not only does it not serve them, but it doesn't serve you. if we want to move into genuine forgiveness, forgiveness that is real, that doesn't just sit there collecting dust, but actually produces something of value, actually produces things like freedom and joy, then we're going to have to acknowledge that there's some lies that we've believed about forgiveness. There is a reason that we look at something that's fake, we look at something that's artificial, and we have believed that it's the real thing. And it's because we have believed lies about the real thing. And that's what we're going to be talking about the next 2 Wednesdays. What are these lies that we've believed about forgiveness that have caused us to hold on to something that isn't real? And today we're going to lean in to the first 3. So your core question, I want you to think about this as we go through the rest of the message. Of the first 3 forgiveness does not statements, which is the most important for you to embrace? We're going to talk about all 3 of these. But of these statements, when we talk about the things that forgiveness doesn't do, which of these speaks to you? Which are you being called to embrace and to lean into? So the first one we're going to lean into is genuine forgiveness does not excuse their bad behavior. It does not excuse bad behavior. You know how in recovery we say it's okay to not be okay? Well, I'm going to give you another one. It is okay to say that's not okay. It is okay to say that is not okay. It is okay to acknowledge wrongdoing. A lot of us have either heard or said things like, oh, but they didn't mean it. Or one that I heard all the time that would make me want to, that's just how they are. Or for some reason we say this one a lot in the South, oh, but they meant well. Y'all, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and good intentions do not outweigh bad behavior. I think this is one we get really confused with, especially in recovery, right? Because we're starting to learn a lot about, hey, why do we make bad choices, right? And it's because we're hurt. It's because of what we've struggled with. And so we know that a lot of times other people are making poor choices because of their hurt, because of their struggles. And we get a little lost in this, right? We get a little confused in the idea that somehow if we're forgiving, we're excusing bad behavior. You know, we talk about hurt people, right? We talk about how, okay, bad things have happened to you. And so, because of that pain, because of that hurt, you tend to turn around and do bad things to other people, right? This is true. We know this is true. But then we take it a step further and we go, so if I forgive you, that must mean I excuse that bad behavior. Hurt people. But what we learn through that is a reason, not an excuse. It is why people may be making poor decisions, not justification for those poor decisions. See, understanding helps give us empathy. It helps us show grace, but it doesn't excuse poor behavior. If you want to legitimately embrace forgiveness, if you really want to experience that freedom with someone who has hurt you, the only way that it's going to start, the absolute only way it's going to start is if you're honest about what happened. If you are willing to honestly call out bad behavior and not hide behind excuses, yours or anyone else's. You can't forgive something that you deny ever happened. Doesn't work that way. Our second one, genuine forgiveness does not require forgetting. I really, really like, there's a little summary in the RA handbook on this one. It says, the wounds are there, and to not acknowledge them would be to refuse the healing that is possible. And pretending it doesn't exist is what? It's denial. So I'm going to tell you, real forgiveness does not involve rug sweeping, covering up, or pretending. Genuine healing forgiveness requires an honest assessment of what happened, how it impacted us, and how we're going to process this. The idea, we hear this all the time, right? Forgive and forget. Like this is just one thing, one time, one thing altogether. That isn't healthy. There's nothing about that is healthy. And we know that. We know if we were talking about any other type of wound, any other type of damage done to us, we would not apply that logic. If somebody came and visited your house and they dropped a glass in your kitchen and you stepped on it and cut your foot wide open, and you forgave them, you would not immediately turn around and say, well, I'm going to forget that happened. I forgave him, so there's no damage. There's no wound. There's no hurt. And you just ignored it. You didn't clean it. You didn't bandage it. You didn't treat it. You didn't seek care. Nothing. Well, in a few weeks, when that infection has set in and it has festered and spread, are you going to be in a good place? Forgiving doesn't mean that we forget and ignore the damage that was. We still have to deal with it. We know that when it comes to wounds that we can see, but we struggle to apply that logic to the ones that we can't see. But it is just as critical. Forgiveness requires acknowledging and treating the hurt, not just forgetting it. Third one, forgiveness does not relieve them of their responsibility. Everybody in this room, you, me, all of us, every one of us is best served when we are allowed to own our own stuff, to take responsibility for our own choices, to take responsibility for our own words and our own actions. None of us is served by someone else managing that for us or us taking that on for someone else. Accountability is kind. Accountability doesn't feel good when we're being held accountable, but it is good for us. When we allow someone to take responsibility, to take ownership of the choices that they've made and the hurt that they caused, this means that we're going to allow them to own and to face any of the natural consequences of their own choices. Now, we need to be really careful here, because sometimes in recovery, we interpret that to mean, oh, I will start to make some consequences and choice. No, that's not what we're talking about. We are not talking about revenge. Revenge is actually putting yourself in the way. It is taking the control. It is taking on all of the responsibility to correct and to make this right. You have assigned yourself role of judge, jury, and executioner. You're in charge. It's not what we're talking about. That's not allowing them to be responsible. That is not allowing them to take ownership. What we're talking about is letting go, stepping out of the way. You're not controlling it. You're not trying to manufacture it. But genuine forgiveness does not try to fix it for them. That is not a part of real forgiveness. And this is something a lot of us struggle with. The idea that if I've forgiven someone, they must not face any consequences for what they've done. I've dealt with this a lot when Brian was still in active addiction. A lot. Well, I thought you said you forgave him. If you didn't forgive him, why won't you bail him out of jail? I thought you forgave him. Well, you must, you haven't forgiven him if you won't let him come home. Why are you still using a breathalyzer? I thought you forgave him. Forgiveness is not enablement. Real, genuine forgiving is not enabling. Forgiveness bears fruit. Forgiveness is life-giving. Enabling kills. And that is how we love people to death. I get how tempting it is to fall into that trap that if I've forgiven you, now you don't have to face anything. That's just not real. That is not true. We see all throughout the Bible how God corrects those that he loves, how he uses circumstances to reach us, to save us in the midst of the choices that we've made. Who in the world are we to get in the way of that? If someone breaks into your home, steals half of what you own, destroys the place that you live, and is arrested, goes to trial, and is sentenced, should you forgive him? Absolutely. Does that mean that they're not going to serve time for what they did? No. Real forgiveness does not mean that you step in and you remove the natural consequences of other people's choices. Forgiving, this is really, I think, important, again, for a lot of us in recovery, especially those of us that have been loving someone in recovery for a long time. So I really, really want you to hear this. Forgiving someone doesn't make you responsible for making them comfortable in their sin. Forgiving someone does not make you responsible for making them comfortable in their sin. They're still going to be uncomfortable, and they should be. That's not forgiveness. Genuine forgiveness is not enablement. Pretending won't work. Faking it won't work. It's going to look good for a minute till you get close, and you're going to know. It's just sitting there, collecting dust, doing absolutely nothing. And eventually, not only is it not helping you, but it will actively hurt you. All that pain and all that anger that you haven't dealt with, that you've brushed aside, that you've pretended to let go, it's going to find a way out. And that's when we get in trouble. That's when our recovery is at risk. That's when the drugs, the alcohol, the anger and pride, whatever it is that we fall back on to sort of mask that and allow us to walk through that process without having to deal with it, that's when we lean back on that. Holding on to unforgiveness is dangerous. Convincing ourselves that this artificial version of forgiveness is real is just as dangerous. And it's what puts our recovery at risk. So I'm going to ask Jeremy and the team to come up here, and here's what we're going to do today. every time we get to step 7, we talk about struggling to forgive, but in a couple of different contexts. So for some of you, when I start talking about forgiveness, when you start thinking about an individual in your life that you're working to forgive right now, it's new, it's fresh, it's the first time. You're sitting here and you haven't been able to take that next step. You haven't been able to push through this step because of some of these lies that you believed. They don't sit right with you. But others of us, so many of us, we feel like we keep revisiting this step. We keep revisiting this step with the same person, with the same situation over and over and over again. And we can't quite figure out why we can't get past this one. And it's because we have settled for an artificial version of the real thing. We've been afraid to face the reality. We've tried to shortcut it. We've tried to move past it. We just want something that looks good but doesn't really require me have to do a whole lot of work on this. But I'm going to tell you something. Once you genuinely forgive someone, genuinely are able to work through it and let it go, you will see benefit from that. That improves your physical, your mental, your emotional, your spiritual health. That is where that peace is found. That is where that joy is found. That is where that freedom is found. But it's only when you pursue real forgiveness. It is only when you are willing to peel the layers back and do the real work, not pushing it aside, not hiding it, not pretending. We talk a lot about how forgiveness is a choice, right? Forgiveness isn't a feeling. We know that. It is a conscious choice that we make. But I also want to acknowledge forgiveness is a process. And I think it's a process that we quite often want to shortcut as quickly as possible. It doesn't feel good to lean into the truth of what someone's done and to remember how it has hurt you. It doesn't feel good to hold someone accountable, to deal with that type of conflict, but it is necessary. It is necessary if we want to get out of step 7, if we want to get out of being stuck with the same person in the same cycle over and over and over again. Because you want something that's real. I mean, don't you want something that actually produces something in your life, something that grows, right? Something that keeps going, something that makes more and more and more of all of these good things. If everybody will stand, here's what we're going to do today. We're not going to do a one-time altar call. I'm not going to ask you right now to decide who you should forgive, and we're going to forgive them today. That's not what we're going to do. We're going to acknowledge that this takes a minute. This can be a process. So I'm not going to ask you to finish something today. I'm just going to ask you to commit to starting something today. That's it. I'm going to ask you to really allow God to speak to your heart. And reveal to you what of these lies have you believed that you've allowed to keep you stuck? Which of these does not statements, which of these truths do you need to embrace? Do you need to start in your path to forgiveness? Forgiveness does not excuse their bad behavior. Do you need to stop making excuses and acknowledge what really happened? Forgiveness does not require forgetting. Do you need to re-examine a wound, actually treat it, actually care for yourself? And forgiveness does not relieve them of their responsibility. Is there an area that you need to step back and you need to let them own it? I would encourage each and every one of us. You can do this from your seat. You can do this at the altar. But this is an opportunity, not for talking, but for listening. Which of these is an area that God is revealing to you that you need to embrace, that you need to start? Lord, I just ask that as we wrap up today, as we go into the altar call, as we go into our people groups, as we go about the rest of our week, Lord, I just ask that you reveal to each and every one of us any of these lies that we've believed that are holding us back, that are keeping us from embracing something that is real, that are keeping us from moving forward in our recovery, moving forward in our relationships. And Lord, I ask that you just give us the strength to take the first step, to embrace that first truth, to start walking toward forgiveness, to start walking toward you, Lord. And you just give us we don't need to know where the end is. We just need to know that we're following you. We're taking that first step. And we're trusting where you're taking us. And Lord, we just thank you in advance for everything that you've done, everything that you're going to keep doing, Lord. In Jesus' name.